If Moses wrote Genesis, how did he know what happened at creation? He wasn't there. A kid in Sunday school asked that once, and no adult in the room had a real answer. That same question has consumed scholars for over 400 years. But the answer isn't God told him what to write. Both sides of the debate have been missing something hiding in the original Hebrew text. And once you see it, it changes not just how you read Genesis, but how you understand what God might be showing you right now. Moses is traditionally credited with writing the first 5 books of the Bible: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Together, they're called the Torah in Hebrew, or the Pentateuch in Greek. And for thousands of years, Jewish and Christian tradition held one consistent view: Moses wrote them. End of discussion. And for most of those books, that makes perfect sense. Exodus describes events Moses personally experienced: the burning bush in the Sinai desert, the 10 plagues unleashed on the Egyptian kingdom, the parting of the Red Sea, with walls of water standing on either side, the giving of the law on Mount Sinai while lightning cracked and the mountain trembled beneath his feet. Moses was there. He saw it. He wrote it down. No problem. But Genesis is different, and the difference is enormous. Genesis covers a span of time that stretches from the creation of the universe all the way down to the death of Joseph in Egypt. Scholars estimate that timeline at roughly 2,500 years of history. Some traditions, based on the genealogies in Genesis, put it even longer. And Moses wasn't born until the beginning of Exodus. He enters the biblical story as a baby in a basket, floating on the Nile River, somewhere around 1500 or 1400 BC, depending on which chronology you follow. That means everything in Genesis happened long before Moses took his first breath: the creation of the world, the fall of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, Cain killing Abel in the field, the flood that covered the earth in the days of Noah, the Tower of Babel rising on the plains of Shinar, the call of Abraham out of Ur of the Chaldeans, that ancient Mesopotamian city near modern-day Iraq, the binding of Isaac on Mount Moriah, Jacob wrestling the angel at the Jabbok River, Joseph interpreting dreams in the prison beneath Pharaoh's palace. Every single one of these events took place centuries, possibly millennia, before Moses existed. So how did he write about them with such detail? How did he know what God said on the first day of creation? How did he know the exact words the serpent whispered to Eve under the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? How did he know the dimensions of Noah's Ark, 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, 30 cubits high? How did he know the precise words of the covenant God made with Abraham under the night sky near the oaks of Mamre in Hebron? He wasn't there for any of it. And this isn't a minor theological footnote. This question sits at the foundation of how we understand the Bible itself. Because if Moses didn't write Genesis, then we have to ask who did. And if he did write it, we have to ask how he accessed information about events no living person had witnessed. Either way, the answer matters, and it matters more than you might think. If you've ever had someone challenge your faith with a question you couldn't answer, you know the feeling, that sudden vertigo, the tightening in your chest, the moment the floor seems to shift under you, and the temptation is either to shut the question down immediately or to let it crack everything open like a hammer hitting glass. But what if the answer to the hard question is actually better than the easy one you've been carrying around? What if that 9-year-old in Sunday school was asking the doorway question, the one that leads to something incredible? That's what we're about to find out. Nobody seriously questioned the authorship of Genesis for most of recorded history. Jewish tradition attributed it to Moses without serious debate. The Talmud, that vast collection of rabbinic commentary compiled over centuries, took Mosaic authorship as a given. Jesus himself referred to the law of Moses multiple times during his ministry. The Pharisees and Sadducees, who disagreed on almost everything from the resurrection of the dead to the authority of oral tradition, both accepted Moses as the author of the Torah. Even the Samaritans, who broke away from mainstream Judaism centuries before Christ, kept their own version of the Pentateuch and attributed it to Moses. For roughly 3,000 years, this was settled. Then came the year 1753. A French physician named Jean Astruc was reading the book of Genesis in its original Hebrew, and he noticed something peculiar, something that had been hiding in plain sight the entire time. He noticed that Genesis uses two different names for God. In some passages, God is called Elohim, a Hebrew word that carries a sense of majesty and transcendence. In other passages, he's called Yahweh, the personal covenant name of God, rendered in most English translations as the Lord in small capital letters. And the sections that use Elohim have a different literary style, a different feel, a different vocabulary than the sections that use Yahweh. Astruc didn't set out to undermine the Bible. He was a devout Catholic. He actually proposed that Moses had used two separate written sources when compiling Genesis, and he considered this entirely compatible with Mosaic authorship. But his observation opened a door that scholars would spend the next 2.5 centuries walking through, and some of them walked very far. By the late 1800s, a German scholar named Julius Wellhausen had developed what became known as the documentary hypothesis. Working from a prestigious position at a German university, Wellhausen built on Astruc's original observation and constructed an elaborate theory. He proposed that the Pentateuch was not written by one man at all. Instead, Wellhausen argued it was stitched together from 4 separate literary sources by editors working hundreds of years after Moses died. He labeled these sources J for the Yahwist, the oldest strand, E for the Elohist, slightly later, D for the Deuteronomist, connected to the reforms of King Josiah, and P for the priestly source, written during or after the Babylonian exile. According to his theory, different communities in Israel each had their own version of the stories, and eventually a final editor, an anonymous redactor, combined them into the seamless text we read today. This theory didn't just make waves, it caused a tsunami. Within a generation, the documentary hypothesis was being taught as established fact in seminaries and universities across Germany, England, and eventually North America. Textbooks were rewritten, curricula were overhauled, and generations of pastors graduated from seminary with the understanding that Moses hadn't written the Torah at all. For many believers, this felt like watching someone take a wrecking ball to the foundation of their house. Because if Wellhausen was right, then Genesis wasn't the word of God delivered through Moses. It was a patchwork quilt assembled by anonymous scribes who may have been inventing stories to serve their own political and religious agendas. But the story doesn't end there, and this is where things get more interesting than either side usually admits. The documentary hypothesis has problems, serious ones, that have accumulated over the past century. For starters, the two names for God argument doesn't hold up as cleanly as Astruc first thought. Ancient Near Eastern texts regularly used multiple names for the same deity depending on the context. In Mesopotamian literature, the god Marduk has dozens of different names, and a single hymn might use several of them. Egyptian texts do the same thing with Ra Amun, and their various combined forms. Using different names for God doesn't require different authors any more than calling someone Mom in one sentence and Dr. Johnson in the next requires two different children. The hypothesis also assumes that ancient editors were far less skilled than modern scholars give them credit for. If the text really was stitched together from 4 contradictory sources, why does Genesis read so smoothly as a unified narrative? The seams that Wellhausen claimed to find often disappear when you read the text in Hebrew rather than in German or English translation. Differences that look like contradictions in translation turn out to be complementary perspectives in the original language. And then there's the archaeological evidence. Genesis contains Egyptian loanwords, specific vocabulary borrowed from the Egyptian language that only someone deeply familiar with Egypt would know. The title given to Potiphar, captain of the guard, corresponds precisely to a known Egyptian administrative position documented in Egyptian records. The Egyptian name given to Joseph, Zaphenath-Paneah, follows authentic Egyptian naming conventions from the Middle Kingdom period. A post-exilic Jewish scribe sitting in Babylon would not have had access to this level of detailed Egyptian linguistic knowledge, but Moses would have. Moses grew up in the Egyptian royal court. He was educated in Egyptian literature, science, and administration. He would have spoken Egyptian before he spoke Hebrew. If anyone in ancient Israel had the cultural toolkit to write Genesis, it was the man who spent his first 40 years living as an Egyptian prince. And then there's the most direct argument of all. Jesus attributed the Torah to Moses. In the Gospel of Mark, speaking to the Pharisees about divorce, Jesus says Moses wrote this command for them. In the Gospel of John, speaking to his critics, he says that if they believed Moses, they would believe him, because Moses wrote about him. In the Gospel of Luke, on the road to Emmaus after his resurrection, Jesus begins with Moses and all the prophets and interprets the scriptures concerning himself. For Christians who take the words of Jesus seriously, his testimony about Moses carries a weight that no academic theory from 19th century Germany can simply set aside. But none of this actually answers the kid's question from Sunday school. Fine, let's say Moses wrote Genesis. The evidence is strong, the tradition is ancient. Jesus confirmed it. But how? How did Moses know what happened at creation? How did he describe events that no human being witnessed? And this is where both sides of the scholarly debate tend to go quiet. The liberals say Moses didn't write it at all, so the question is moot. The conservatives say God told him and leave it at that. But neither answer is satisfying, and the real answer is hiding somewhere nobody thinks to look. It's hiding in the Hebrew text itself. Open your English Bible to Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. It reads, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." 12 words in English. Simple, clean, familiar. You've probably heard that sentence 1,000 times. You can probably quote it from memory. Now look at what it actually says in Hebrew. It's only 7 words, and every single one of them is doing something your English translation can't fully capture. Start with the first word, Bereshit. Your Bible translates it, "in the beginning." And that's a reasonable translation, but it doesn't capture the full weight of what's happening. The root of Bereshit is reshit, which means head, or first, or chief. It carries a sense of primacy, of authority, of origin point. Some ancient rabbis read it not as a statement about time, but as a statement about priority. In the headship, meaning God's sovereign authority, is the context for everything that follows. Other rabbinic interpretations connect Reshit to Chokmah, wisdom, reading the verse as, Through wisdom, God created. The early church father Origen pointed out that the Greek Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, completed around 250 BC in Alexandria, translates the opening in a way that leaves open whether it means at the beginning of time or by means of a first principle. Why does this matter? Because the very first word of the Bible is already doing something more sophisticated than a simple chronological timestamp. It's establishing a framework. It's declaring that everything you're about to read flows from a single source of origin and power. This doesn't read like a history book starting at chapter 1, paragraph 1. It reads like a vision opening, declaring the foundation of everything that follows. Now look at the next word. Bara. In English, created. But bara in Hebrew is a very specific verb. It's used exclusively of God. No human being ever bara anything in the entire Old Testament. When humans make things, the Hebrew uses asar, meaning to make or do, or yatsar, meaning to form or fashion, words for shaping and crafting from existing materials. A potter yatsar clay into a vessel, a carpenter asar wood into a table. But bara is reserved for God alone. It implies bringing into existence something that had no prior existence. This is not a word a human storyteller would use casually. This is precise theological vocabulary, chosen with intention and loaded with meaning. And if you've ever felt like your life needed something completely new, not a renovation of the old, not a rearrangement of existing pieces, but something that didn't exist before, that's what bara is. That's the kind of creation only God does. And then there's the grammar. The way the verbs flow through Genesis chapter 1 follows a specific pattern called the Yiktol form. This is the standard narrative sequence tense in biblical Hebrew. It's the tense used to describe events unfolding one after another, each connected to the last. And God said, and it was, and God saw, and God separated, and God called. Each verb builds on the previous one, creating a chain of events witnessed in sequence. But here's what makes Genesis 1 different from other narrative passages. Combined with the repeated refrains, and God said, and it was so, and God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning, the text takes on a liturgical quality, a ceremonial rhythm, almost like a chant, like the narration of a grand procession witnessed firsthand. You can hear the rhythm even in English. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. That rhythm is not accidental. It's the cadence of a witness, someone watching, someone narrating what they see as they see it unfolding before them. There's a difference, and it's a critical one, between someone writing a historical account based on second-hand information and someone transcribing something they are witnessing in real time. And once you hear Genesis 1 that way, once you notice that it sounds like a vision being described rather than a lesson being taught, you can't unhear it. And that observation opens the door to a question that changes everything. What if Moses didn't just know about creation? What if he saw it? Think about what you know about prophets in the Bible. How did Ezekiel receive his messages from God? He saw visions, vivid, detailed, surreal visions. He stood in a valley full of dry bones and watched as sinews and flesh covered them and breath entered their bodies, and they stood up as a vast army. He saw a wheel within a wheel spinning in the sky, covered with eyes, accompanied by living creatures with 4 faces. He was taken in vision to the temple in Jerusalem and given a guided tour of its measurements, its decorations, its gates, and its glory. How did Daniel receive his revelation about the future of empires? Through dreams and night visions. He saw 4 great beasts rising from a churning sea, each one representing a world empire. He watched as a statue made of gold, silver, bronze, and iron was struck by a stone cut without human hands and shattered into dust. He saw the Ancient of Days seated on a throne of fire, with thousands upon thousands serving him, and one like a son of man coming on the clouds of heaven. How did Isaiah receive his prophetic calling? He saw the Lord sitting on a throne, high and exalted, in the temple. The train of his robe filled the entire space. Seraphim with 6 wings flew above him, calling, "Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts." The doorposts shook, the temple filled with smoke, and a burning coal was taken from the altar and pressed to his lips. How did John receive the book of Revelation? He was in the Spirit on the Lord's day and heard a voice behind him like a trumpet. He turned and saw 7 golden lampstands and a figure with hair white as wool and eyes like blazing fire. He was told, "Come up here, and I will show you what must take place." He was caught up and shown the unfolding of human history from a heavenly vantage point. 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, and a new heaven and a new earth descending like a bride. In every single case, the prophet received information about events they were not physically present for through a direct visual experience granted by God. They didn't read about these things in a book. They didn't get a memo. They saw them. They experienced them with the vividness of someone standing in the middle of a battlefield, or a throne room, or a desert valley. The Hebrew language has specific words for this kind of experience. Machazeh is a prophetic vision. It comes from the root chaza, which means to see or to gaze. It's used in the book of Numbers when Balaam receives his oracle. He says he is the one who hears the words of God, who sees the vision of the Almighty, who falls prostrate and whose eyes are opened. Chazon is another word for vision. It's the word used in the opening of the book of Isaiah, the Chazon of Isaiah, son of Amoz, which he saw. The entire prophetic book is framed as something Isaiah saw, not something he thought up. Mare means an appearance, something shown, a sight. It's used when God speaks to Miriam and Aaron in the book of Numbers and says something remarkable about Moses. With him I speak face to face, clearly, and not in riddles. He sees the Temuna of the Lord. Pause on that for a moment. God is drawing a distinction between Moses and every other prophet. Other prophets get dreams and dark sayings and parables. Moses gets direct visual communication, face to face. Moses sees the Temuna, the form, the likeness, the visible representation of God himself. If Moses had the most direct, the most vivid, the most unmediated prophetic vision of any figure in the Old Testament, is it really hard to imagine that God showed him the creation of the world? Now this is where it gets interesting. Moses spent 40 days and 40 nights on Mount Sinai, alone with God, inside the thick cloud that covered the mountain's peak. The book of Exodus describes this encounter in striking physical terms. The mountain shook, fire blazed at the summit, thunder rolled across the desert. The people of Israel camped at the base, trembled with fear, and begged Moses not to let God speak to them directly. What happened during those 40 days? According to the biblical text, Moses received the tablets of the law, the 10 Commandments, inscribed by the finger of God on stone. He received the instructions for building the tabernacle, down to the exact measurements, the specific materials, the colors of the curtains, the design of the golden lampstand, the recipe for the incense. But the biblical text also hints that Moses received much more. The book of Deuteronomy records God telling Moses to write a song and teach it to the Israelites. The preceding chapters describe Moses writing all the words of this law in a book. And the book of Exodus tells us that Moses wrote down everything the Lord had said. Jewish tradition goes even further. The book of Jubilees, a text written around the 2nd century BC and considered authoritative by many early Jewish communities, including the Essenes at Qumran, claims that during those 40 days on Sinai, the angel of the presence narrated the history of the world to Moses. From the creation of the heavens and the earth, through the lives of the patriarchs, it was revealed to Moses in detail so that he could write it down. The Midrash Rabbah, a major collection of rabbinic commentary, contains traditions that God showed Moses everything from the creation of the world to the Messianic age. Other rabbinic sources describe God unfurling a scroll of fire before Moses, or projecting visions before his eyes like images on a screen. And this isn't some fringe mystical idea invented by later rabbis. This concept of prophetic vision as the mechanism of revelation sits squarely within the mainstream prophetic tradition of ancient Israel. The prophets were called seers. The old word for prophet in Hebrew was roh, literally one who sees. The book of 1 Samuel explicitly says that formerly in Israel, if someone went to inquire of God, they would say, "Come, let us go to the seer," because the prophet of today used to be called a seer. Prophecy in Israel was primarily a visual experience. Prophets were people who saw things others couldn't see. Now think about that with a modern analogy. Imagine someone sits you down in a dark room and puts a virtual reality headset over your eyes. They say, "I'm going to show you everything. From the first instant the universe existed to the moment you were born. You're going to watch it unfold as though you were there." You put the headset on. You see light exploding out of nothing. You see oceans forming, land rising, trees spreading across the hills, animals filling the forests and fields. And then you see a figure formed from the dust of the ground and breath entering its lungs. When you take the headset off and someone hands you a pen and paper and says, "Write what you saw," how would you write it? You wouldn't write it like a textbook. You wouldn't write it like a lab report. You wouldn't write it like a journalist filing a story based on interviews and press releases. You'd write it like someone describing an experience. You'd use the language of a witness, not a researcher. You'd write exactly the way Genesis 1 reads. And if God showed Moses things he could never have known on his own, it raises a question about your own life. How many things has God been trying to show you that you've been too busy, too distracted, or too skeptical to receive? We'll come back to that. First, let's look at the structure. Once you understand that Genesis 1 may be a vision transcript, a record of something Moses saw rather than something he was told, the structure of the text starts making a different kind of sense. Scholars have long noticed that the 6 days of creation follow a specific literary pattern that goes far beyond simple chronology. Days 1 through 3 establish domains. Day 1 creates the domain of light and darkness. Day 2 creates the domain of sky and sea, separating the waters above from the waters below. Day 3 creates the domain of dry land and vegetation. Then days 4 through 6 fill those domains with inhabitants. Day 4 fills the domain of light and darkness with the sun, moon, and stars. Day 5 fills the domain of sky and sea with birds and fish. Day 6 fills the domain of dry land with animals, and finally, humanity. Day 1 corresponds to Day 4. Day 2 corresponds to Day 5. Day 3 corresponds to Day 6. It's a deliberate literary architecture, a mirrored structure in the original Hebrew that reflects itself, the first half answering the second half. This isn't a random sequence of events thrown together by an uneducated storyteller. It's a carefully organized literary masterpiece. Scholars call it the framework interpretation. The days may not be describing a chronological sequence of 24-hour periods. They're describing a logical structure, a vision of divine ordering presented in a form that's both memorable and theologically profound. And the language supports this reading at every level. Look at the phrase that repeats after each act of creation. And God saw that it was good. The Hebrew verb there, wayah, means and he saw. It's the language of observation, of witnessing, of looking at something and evaluating it. It positions God as an artisan stepping back from his workbench to admire what he's just made. But it also positions the one receiving the vision, the one hearing the account, as seeing what God sees, as watching over God's shoulder. You're not being told about creation, you're being shown it through someone else's eyes. And then the recurring scene change marker, and there was evening, and there was morning. This phrase has puzzled commentators for centuries. Evening comes before morning, which doesn't match most people's intuitive sense of how a day works. We think of days starting in the morning, so why does Genesis start each day with evening? In Jewish tradition, the day does begin at evening. That's why Sabbath starts at sunset on Friday. But there's another possibility that fits beautifully with the vision idea. If you're watching a vision unfold, a sequence of images being revealed before your eyes, imagine what happens between scenes. The vision goes dark, silence, blackness, evening, and then light returns. A new image fills your field of vision. Morning. A new scene begins. And there was evening, and there was morning. May not be a clock measurement at all. It may be a scene transition, like watching a film where the screen fades to black between sequences, and then fades back in to reveal the next act. Moses isn't counting hours. He's describing the rhythm of revelation, the pulse of what he's seeing, as God shows him one frame after another. Now zoom out even further, and the picture gets even more remarkable. Biblical scholars in the past several decades have noticed that the entire creation account in Genesis 1 mirrors the structure of an ancient Near Eastern temple inauguration ceremony. In the ancient world, when a new temple was built, the priests would perform a 7-day dedication ceremony. Each day involved specific rituals establishing the temple as the official dwelling place of the deity. The temple was being transformed from a building into a home for the god. The parallels with Genesis 1 are striking. God is building the cosmos as his temple. The earth is the ground floor. The sky with its expanse is the ceiling. The sun and moon are the lampstands, the lights that illuminate the sanctuary. The vegetation is the garden surrounding the holy place. The animals are the living decorations. And humanity, created in God's image, is the priesthood, placed in the temple to serve and maintain it. And what happens on the seventh day? God rests. But the Hebrew word for rest, Shabbat, doesn't mean God was tired or exhausted. In ancient Near Eastern temple theology, when a deity rested in his temple, it meant he was taking his seat, ascending his throne, assuming his position of authority and sovereignty. The seventh day isn't about divine inactivity. It's about divine enthronement. God has finished building his cosmic temple, and now he takes his rightful place as its king. This reading transforms Genesis 1 from a science lesson into a coronation ceremony. Genesis 1 is answering a different question than what happened first, second, third. Its real concern is who is in charge, and what's the purpose of everything that exists? And that distinction matters enormously. Genesis 1 is not a science textbook. It was never intended to be. It's a temple inauguration vision. It's a prophetic revelation of God establishing his cosmic kingdom. And Moses is the prophet who received it, standing on the mountain of God, watching the one who made everything demonstrate his sovereign artistry. So does that mean Genesis 1 isn't true? Not at all. It's true the way a vision is true. It speaks to meaning rather than mechanics. It answers who is in charge and what everything exists for. If this is hitting different for you, if you've never heard Genesis explained this way before, hit subscribe. We break down scripture like this every single week, going straight to the Hebrew and Greek to find what your English Bible couldn't carry across. Now, we've built the case that Genesis 1 reads like a vision, but there's still a question hanging. Does the remaining evidence support the idea that Moses is the one who compiled, organized, and wrote it all down? The answer is yes, and the forensic evidence is surprisingly specific. Start with the Egyptian fingerprints scattered throughout the text. Genesis is saturated with details about Egypt that only someone intimately familiar with Egyptian culture, language, and administration would know. The title given to Potiphar, captain of the guard, corresponds to a well-documented Egyptian administrative position, Joseph's appointment ceremony in Genesis, where Pharaoh removes his signet ring and places it on Joseph's hand, drapes him in garments of fine Egyptian linen, and hangs a gold chain around his neck, matches Egyptian investiture practices found in tomb paintings from the Middle Kingdom period. These details aren't available in Babylonian libraries. They're not common knowledge in ancient Israel. They come from inside the Egyptian court. The embalming of Jacob, described as taking 40 days with an additional 30 days of mourning, aligns with Egyptian mummification procedures documented by the Greek historian Herodotus and confirmed by modern archaeological analysis of Egyptian mummies. The 40-day embalming period matches the natron desiccation stage of Egyptian mummification, a detail so specific that scholars consider it one of the strongest internal markers of Egyptian origin in the biblical text. A writer living in Babylon during the exile, centuries after Egypt had changed its practices and administrative structures, would not have known these details with this level of precision. But Moses, raised as a prince in the court of Pharaoh, educated by the finest Egyptian tutors, trained in the language and customs and administrative bureaucracy of the most powerful nation on earth, would have known them intimately. The text carries his fingerprints the way a clay tablet carries the impression of its scribe. Then there's the internal structure of Genesis itself. Throughout the book, a formula recurs again and again. These are the generations of. In Hebrew, the word is toledot. It appears 11 times in Genesis, each time marking the beginning or ending of a major section. These are the generations of the heavens and the earth. These are the generations of Adam. These are the generations of Noah. These are the generations of Shem. All the way through to these are the generations of Jacob. Some scholars believe these toledot phrases function as colophons. In ancient Mesopotamia, when a scribe finished inscribing a clay tablet, he would add a colophon at the end, a short note identifying the author, the owner, or the topic. If the toledot markers serve a similar function, they suggest that Genesis wasn't created from scratch by a single author imagining the distant past. They suggest it was compiled from pre-existing records, each one bearing the name of the patriarch who either authored or possessed it. This fits with what's sometimes called the tablet theory, proposed in detail by Air Commodore P.J. Wiseman in the early 20th century. The idea is that patriarchs like Adam, Noah, Shem, Abraham, and Jacob each kept written records of the events they witnessed or were told about. These records would have been inscribed on clay tablets or written on papyrus and passed down from generation to generation, father to son, as a sacred family archive. Moses then would have inherited these records. Through the Israelite community, through the family line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, through the years of sojourning in Canaan and living in Egypt, these ancient documents would have made their way into the hands of the one man uniquely positioned to compile them into a unified narrative. So the picture that emerges is layered and rich. Moses wasn't sitting on a rock in the desert making things up out of thin air. And he wasn't taking word-for-word dictation from God like a secretary transcribing a business letter. He was a prophet who received a direct vision of creation on Mount Sinai. He was a scholar with access to ancient family records passed down through the patriarchal line over centuries. He was an Egyptian-educated scribe with the literary sophistication to organize those sources into a coherent, structured narrative. And he was working under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, guided by divine oversight, to produce a text that was historically grounded, theologically profound, and relevant to every generation that would ever read it. That's a richer, more beautiful, more textured claim than simply saying God told him what to write. It means Genesis is a text with multiple layers of testimony woven into its very structure. Eyewitness accounts from the patriarchs, prophetic vision from the throne room of God, editorial brilliance from a man trained in two civilizations, and divine sovereignty holding the entire project together across centuries. The question was never Moses or not Moses. The question was always, what kind of text is Genesis, and what does that tell us about how God works? If you've been with us this long, there's a reason, and it probably goes deeper than academic curiosity about ancient authorship. Something about this question connects to where you are right now, and I think I know what it is. If you're watching this, chances are you've felt it at some point. That feeling where your life looks like Genesis 1, verse 2, formless and void. The ancient Hebrew words there are tohu wabohu. They describe a state of chaos, emptiness, purposelessness. Tohu carries the idea of waste, confusion, unreality. Bohu adds emptiness, vacancy, a hollowness where substance should be. Together, they paint a picture of a world without structure, without meaning, without light. Just darkness hovering over deep, churning water. Maybe it was after a breakup that shattered a future you'd already mentally built. When the apartment that was supposed to feel like home suddenly felt like a crypt. Maybe it was a phone call from a doctor's office that rewrote your entire future in one sentence. Maybe it was the slow, quiet erosion of purpose that happens when you've been going through the motions for so long, you've forgotten what the motions were even for. Maybe it's right now. Maybe your life feels formless and void as you're watching this. Tohu wabohu. And here's what Genesis 1 says happened next. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." The Hebrew word for hovering is merashephet. It's the same word used in the book of Deuteronomy to describe an eagle hovering over its young before teaching them to fly. Not abandoning them, not ignoring them, but hovering, watching with tender attention, present and protective, ready to act, but waiting for the right moment. That word tells you something crucial about God's character. Before God spoke light into existence, He was already there, already present over the chaos, already hovering above the darkness. He didn't arrive after the crisis. He was there before the first word was spoken. If Moses received Genesis 1 as a vision, then what he saw was not just the creation of the physical universe. He saw the pattern of how God operates in every situation, across all of time, always present before the breakthrough, always hovering before speaking, always watching before acting, always in the chaos before the order comes. And that pattern didn't end when the sixth day was over. It continues now, in your life, in your marriage, in your diagnosis, in your bankruptcy, in your grief, in your confusion. Think about what God did for Moses. He showed him the entire arc of creation, events Moses could never have witnessed, things that happened before any human drew breath. God pulled back the curtain of time itself and said, "Let me show you what I did. Let me show you how I work. Let me show you who I am." The Hebrew word gala means to reveal, to uncover, to lay bare. It's the word used when God reveals secrets to his servants, the prophets. It's the word used when hidden things are brought into the light, when the veil is torn away and reality stands exposed. And here's what makes this personal. The same God who showed Moses the beginning of everything is the same God who sees the entire arc of your life, from beginning to end. He doesn't need you to explain your situation to him. He isn't confused by your circumstances. He already sees it. All of it. The chapter you're in, the chapter you haven't reached yet, the resolution you can't imagine from where you're standing, the meaning that will only become clear when you look back years from now. Moses couldn't travel backward in time to witness creation. He couldn't stand at the edge of the garden and watch God breathe life into Adam's nostrils. He couldn't climb aboard the ark with Noah. He couldn't sit under the stars with Abraham and hear God's promise firsthand. But he didn't need to, because God showed him. And you can't see your own future. You can't peek around the corner into next year. You can't know how this chapter of your life ends. You don't get to skip ahead and read the last page, but you don't need to, because the one who showed Moses the beginning of all things also sees the end of yours, and he's hovering, right now, over whatever chaos you're standing in. That principle runs through every prophetic encounter in the entire Bible. God shows people what they cannot see on their own, and the appropriate response isn't demanding proof, insisting on being physically present for every event, or refusing to believe anything you haven't personally verified. The appropriate response is trust. The kind of trust that says, "You showed Moses a creation he never witnessed, and he believed what he saw. I can't see where my life is going, but I trust that you can. Show me what you want me to see, and I'll trust the rest." Genesis 1 isn't just about the origin of the universe. It's about the nature of revelation itself. It's about a God who doesn't leave his people in the dark. A God who opens eyes, who pulls back curtains, who takes broken, confused, formless lives and speaks order and light and purpose into them. And if you've ever prayed for clarity, for direction, for some sign that there's a plan behind all the chaos, then you're praying the prayer that Genesis 1 already answered. Yes, there is a plan. Yes, there is order behind the chaos. Yes, the Spirit is hovering over your deep, over your darkness, over your formless void. The question is whether you'll trust it, the way Moses did. Remember that kid in Sunday school, the one who raised his hand and asked how Moses could have written about something he never saw? That kid wasn't being rebellious. That kid wasn't trying to stump the teacher or score points against the Bible. That kid was asking the most important question anyone in the room could have asked. Because the answer isn't God told him what to write. And the answer isn't he didn't write it. Some anonymous editors made it up. The answer is something bigger and more beautiful than either of those options. The answer is that God showed Moses the creation of the universe through direct prophetic vision, that Moses had access to ancient written records passed down through the patriarchs, father to son, tablet to tablet, across centuries, that the Holy Spirit guided his hand as he compiled these sources into the text that opens our Bible, and that the Hebrew language itself preserves the fingerprints of a man who was writing not from imagination, but from experience, from vision, from revelation. That question was the beginning of a deeper faith, and maybe that's where you are right now, standing at the edge of a question that feels dangerous, holding a doubt that feels disloyal, carrying an uncertainty that nobody in your life seems willing to sit with. Bring the question. The text can handle it. The text was designed for exactly that. Every layer of Genesis, from the Hebrew verbs to the literary structure to the Egyptian loanwords, rewards the person who digs deeper instead of looking away. If this changed how you think about Genesis, watch the next one. We break down Genesis chapter 1 word by word in the original Hebrew and show you exactly what your English translation had to leave behind. It's on screen right now. I'll see you there.